All right, everybody, welcome to episode 2 of Deep Devils. This is Lee from the Devil's Advocates, and I got Joe here from State of the Deep. Jay, he writes his name to JJ State of the Deep. How you doing tonight, Joe?
I'm great, man. You've been
I'm,
busy, DA.
oh my God, like it's nonstop on the channel. I can't believe how many videos I'm putting out. I had somebody actually bust my nuts and said, you put out too many videos. So,
Well, you've
but
been on
yeah.
fire the last week or so.
I've had a big week for the channel, that's for sure. And by the way, our first video, and for those who don't know, what this is, let me tell you a little bit about this structure. Joe and I decided we wanted to kind of have a space for some little deeper conversation, although we don't want it to be boring and dry and just put you to sleep and shit like that. So hopefully we'll deliver a little bit of entertainment as well. But this is for a little deeper dive into some stuff. So yes, I do a lot of true crime, and my channel is a lot of true crime. I believe in the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law. I do legal breakdowns. I break down police reports and legal documents. But as Joe and I were talking at a diner when we first met, we have a passion for the foundational stuff behind all of the true crime things, like the Charlie Kirk thing, Joe. Like there's so much behind the story of Charlie Kirk's thing that how do you not talk about those issues?
Yeah, and you bring up Charlie Kirk. One thing I wanted to point out right from the start is we're probably never going to get the real story of what's going on. The government's involved, obviously, and there's a lot of different information that's been coming out. Some of it's trickled out, some of it came out right from the start. What I would say and what I like to emphasize to people, look at what happens as a result of these major events.
Right.
Because, as I've said to you, and I believe I mentioned it on our last video, I said this is going to be used to push predictive policing and domestic surveillance, right? That's one of the agendas. And it's clear, the government's been pretty clear about it. All the NGOs that they're partnering with are pretty open about that. And now they're ramping up that rhetoric. And now you have Larry Ellison, who just purchased TikTok, or he's one of the main investors in TikTok. He openly talks about increasing surveillance, right? So,
like we need more of that.
right. I mean, we could go back and forth about the Charlie Kirk stuff, and there's a million theories. We know what they are. We've both been following the case. You've reported on it a lot. I've been watching constant videos on it, different takes on it.
Yeah, and people are losing their minds. People are losing their minds on the Charlie Kirk situation, which is another reason why what Joe and I want to talk about tonight is, again, some of the narrative, like you talked about, like the narrative being shaped and the rhetoric that's being used and the agenda that is being pushed by the Charlie Kirk situation. And a lot of what our Deep Devils concept was when you and I were talking about doing this show together is we wanted to try to show why we think there's an agenda here and why we think there's a narrative being pushed and what we're going to dive into tonight to just get a little bit ahead so you know what's coming up is we're going to get into things like we talked about last week, the Smith-Mundt Act and the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, and now we have the Charlie Kirk Act, which wants to tweak the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act as well. We should talk about that if we don't. Remind me when we get to that. I think we might have it on the slide. But the point being is that what we're talking about is how much does the government use the media to shape public opinion, to paint a narrative, and therefore, you know, and a case like Charlie Kirk, which is already polarizing to start with, how much is being manipulated by the powers that be to present a certain narrative?
Right. And like I said, we all like to, especially us true crime types, we like to dig into the different theories and the different information that gets released. But again, it's so tied to the things we've been talking about, the media, the narrative shaping. And what we're going to talk about today in more detail is directly tied to that. The narrative shaping, the reasons behind it, why it always seems like the media is in lockstep on these narratives. And
yeah, and specifically what we're going to get into, and I think this is the important part, is we're going to get and talk into whether or not the law is allowing the US government to manipulate the media to propagandize the American people, to paint the narrative? Is that allowed by law? That's really the heart of what we're going to be talking about tonight. Is when did the government start buying the media? A lot of people believe the media is bought and paid for. We're going to talk about whether or not there's proof, whether there's any teeth to the rumors that the government literally owns the media and uses it as a propaganda tool against the U.S., as crazy as that sounds, as against their own people. And maybe that's a little harsh. I don't want to say that we're anti-government, we're anti-establishment, or anything like that. But we do want to talk about the history tonight, Joe, right? About how certain laws and certain things have been declassified now to show that the government has been using and shaping the media to shape public opinion.
Right. And that it's likely still going on today. And we'll
Very
also
much.
touch on some things that point to that as well. And again, with the Charlie Kirk case, you know, the narratives that are being pushed, there's a term that's being thrown around quite a bit right now online. You've probably heard it. Other people probably have too. Flooding the zone,
Mm-hmm.
where they just flood the zone with all these different theories and all this different information. And oftentimes, if it's government sanctioned stuff, they benefit by that, right? They want to muddy the waters.
Yeah.
And by flooding the zone with a variety of theories and a variety of different information, you know, that can distract people and that can kind of take attention away from what is at the heart of what's really going on.
Before we get too deep into what we really want to talk about tonight, and what we had, Joe and I kind of said we want to focus on is a thing called Operation Mockingbird, also known by some as Project Mockingbird. And I think we're going to try to distinguish what the difference is between Operation Mockingbird and Project Mockingbird, and whether or not it's really real or not. And spoiler alert, it is real, but we're gonna talk about separating the myth from the fact. But before we get completely into that, I did want to take a moment to address an issue that's coming up a lot, which is we are becoming very divisive in this country. We're fighting amongst each other all the time. And again, at the end of the day, is there an agenda to keep us Americans fighting amongst each other over the little things so that we miss the big picture? I would say yes. But along that lines, I want to take a moment to talk about, just briefly, because I've had some people challenge me lately, that they say that I believe in hate speech because I allow somebody to say something and not correct them when they're coming up with theories. And let me make it clear just briefly, because this is a personal thing that's really bugging me. Allowing someone the space to ask questions and challenge the narrative is not hate speech. If it's something you don't like, the question that's being asked, that's not hate speech. By definition, and I watched a really great attorney just recently, I won't go too long on this, a really great attorney recently talking about hate speech is when somebody incites violence. Hey, we should round up all the people of this type persuasion and shoot them, would be an example of hate speech. Hate speech is not having a different opinion. So just a small caveat, when we talk about things and it's not something that you like, oh, you're suggesting that so-and-so is involved. Asking questions about if someone's involved is not hate speech. And I just want to make sure we make that distinction. None of us, as far as I'm concerned, hate anyone. And when we ask questions, it's because we don't trust mainstream media, and we don't hate mainstream media either. We just don't trust them. So anything you want to add to that, Joe? I know that was kind of a personal tangent, but it's important to me.
Yeah, sure. You know, that's one of the tactics that's used. It's try to label anybody who questions authority or official narratives, either a conspiracy theorist or an anti-Semite in the case of questions that have been raised about Israel, or, you know, whatever the case may be. It's a way to dismiss people and marginalize them. It's an age-old thing. It goes on in the media constantly for many years. And I guess what we're talking about today, it really is related, because if you have control over an information source, right, and you want to push a certain narrative, you want to have that same mechanism shoot down things that don't align with that narrative. And deeming things hate speech is a pretty effective way of doing that.
Yeah, and I've been troubled lately. And again, I want to make sure you understand, I'm not political on this show. So just because there happens to be a Republican in office who have made some public statements that I'm going to comment on now, doesn't mean I'm a Democrat or a liberal attacking conservatism. Please get this kind of narrative shit out of your head. That is not where it goes. But when you have the president, for example, using an event like Charlie Kirk as an example of how the left is waging war on the right, and that we need to go after hate speech, like anyone who talks about the topic as somehow involved in some kind of radical terrorism in America. That kind of narrative shaping is pissing me off. And I don't care if you're Donald Trump or Barack Obama or Joe Biden. I don't care who you are. When you try to make people sound like if you talk against me, you're a terrorist and I will shut you down as a terrorist, that's a problem. Not hate speech, but it's a problem, in my opinion.
Agreed.
So I got some slides for us, Joe, that I want to pull up as we I want to get into the meat here, talking about Project Mockingbird. And now you and I both were really interested in, we started talking about the Smith-Mundt Act and the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, which is, again, it sounds like you're allowing the United States government to influence and use propaganda against their own citizens in that deal. But I want to talk about this whole whether or not Project Mockingbird is a real thing or not. I'm going to pull it up on screen, some slides for us to talk about. I don't know. And again, by the way, for those who haven't watched the two of us together, we're real loose on an outline. So we haven't scripted this out. You can probably tell we're not reading from a script. And a lot of this stuff is just coming off the top of the head. We have some bullet points. We're like, hey, let's talk about this, this, and this. And, Joe might say, I want to also make sure we touch on this. And that's about it. It's just it's a loose thing. So what I'm going with that is, I show a slide and I might not even have 100% agreement from Joe on whether he agrees with it. I think one of the things that I was hearing about is that some people have and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but there's those who separate the difference between Operation Mockingbird and Project Mockingbird. And according to what I understand, Operation Mockingbird was kind of loosely a name that they gave around a series of documents and exposures of within Congress. Congress did an investigation, and it never really officially, as far as I understood, officially had the name Operation Mockingbird in any kind of piece of paper that was proven, which leads some people to think Operation Mockingbird's a myth that didn't happen. However, the documents do show that project, what they're talking about, exists. And I don't know how it got the name Operation Mockingbird. And the last thing I'll say about that before you elaborate, Joe, is Project Mockingbird apparently was a wiretap thing that happened. That did get a name on it from what I understand. And so some people think that when you talk about Operation Mockingbird or you're talking about Project Mockingbird, they're kind of related in a way, but they're separate. Do you have any comments that you want to add on that clarification, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, from what I know, Operation Mockingbird was sort of the lay term for that program of interaction and direct collusion between the CIA and the media. And whereas Project Mockingbird is more specific to one thing. And in the church committee hearings was about a lot of things. It wasn't just about this. It was about many, many different things. It was essentially about CIA overreach, right? That's one of the main overviews of the church committee hearings.
And I think we've got a slide about the church committee as well. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so, no, you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I think the Operation Mockingbird is sort of like the name that was given to it unofficially.
Yeah, and because it's unofficial, like I said, it's one of those things that detractors who say Operation Mockingbird doesn't exist will make it sound like what they're like everything that we just said is bullshit. Oh, well, Operation Mockingbird doesn't exist. Show me a document that says it exists. And it's not the name per se. It's like the name is, like you said, a lay term that kind of encompasses this series of documents and history that we're going to go over here. So I just wanted to kind of make that clarification. Again, I'm going to kind of look at this slide and remind myself what I put together. Covert Cold War influence. This is kind of the start. The Cold War is when this kind of these projects came in. It's the same thing with the Smith-Mundt Act. It was basically a time when we're at war, when the United States government is using propaganda in theory against our enemies to sell a certain idea. But then the waters began to be muddied as they started to use that same propaganda tool against their own people. Again, there was a law, the Smith-Mundt Act, that basically said you can't use these propaganda tools that you're using in the world to tell everybody about how great America is and how we need to bring and open up a can of democracy on your ass. You can't use that against Americans. But then the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act basically said, hey, look, that's outdated. You can't keep Americans from watching international news. So it's okay to go ahead and propagandize your own people. And maybe that's an overstatement of it. But again, all of this stems from world wars, right? Where your government is trying to send a message. And so, Joe, do you have any comments about that as we continue to read through this slide?
No, just that we're going to talk about, we're going to have some asides to this, and we're going to talk about why this is relevant today. And that's probably, in my opinion, the most important thing that we can get out of this is how it's relevant now.
Yeah, and in here and on this slide is the church committee, which you talked about already. The church committee from 1975 to 76, there was an investigation by Congress into things like what we're going to talk about, which is the CIA in bed with buying reporters to shape public opinion. And in theory, you would say, well, that's just done for foreign intelligence or foreign governments. No, sir. This apparently was used against the American people as well. And when you have allegations, as the church committee was starting to look into, there was literally, mainstream media figures on the payroll, if you will, of the CIA, and so that begins to that raises some alarm bells, and that's what a lot of this will be about as we talk about this and move through the slides. 1967, this was a major moment in our timeline. Ramparts magazine, and by the way, I'm gonna try to include, if I can remember, in the show notes, the actual links to these magazines. That's a very, very lengthy article they're talking about here. The Ramparts magazine exposes CIA funding of the National Student Association. So again, this is where the CIA is going in and actually trying to influence behavior in America, American citizens, and so there was an expose reported at a big expose on Ramparts magazine, and there's online PDF versions of it. I've got a link to it that I'll try to put in the show notes. And again, as this bullet says, it doesn't prove Project Mockingbird because there isn't a document that says Mockingbird on it, but it did prove secret CIA funding of a major U.S. student group, triggering the journalism that led to wider investigations. So that big article in the Ramparts, which I can provide a link to if you want to get deeper into the woods, is basically opened up a can of worms. Like, holy shit, is the CIA going into colleges? Are they how deeply are they embedded in influencing public opinion? You got some thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, it's kind of cute what they do with the acronyms, right? The NSA, National Student Association, the
Right.
CAI at Utah State.
Right.
They like to wink, wink, nod, nod, with the public when they do these things. But um, after we're done with this presentation here, the slides, let's briefly touch on how they're involved with universities still to this day.
And maybe that will relate to the Charlie Kirk situation going
Yeah, you
on.
never
Maybe
know. Could.
you never know. Okay, well, good. I'm intrigued. I can't wait to hear what you say on that. I mean, I literally don't know what you're going to talk about, but I'm excited. We'll talk about the church committee here a little bit. 1975, 1976. The church. This was a congressional committee found during their investigation that there were 50 journalists with secret relationships with the CIA. That's a big deal. People really need to stop and pause a moment and think about what was just said. That Congress did an investigation and found that the CIA had 50 journalists with secret relationships with the CIA on their payroll. That should be a problem. We should have a separation between our government and the media. The media should be holding our government accountable. The media should be our spokesman between the media and our government, asking them difficult questions. I would say, Joe, we've gotten to this point in the country a long time ago where the media just doesn't ask the government difficult questions anymore. They don't challenge them.
Yeah, I mean, between government influence and corporate influence in the media, they're told what to talk about. It should be pretty clear by now. Serve the military industrial complex, serve the big corporations. I don't need to say who they are. They do most of the advertising on the mainstream media. And, serve the bigger financial interests. That's where they get their talking points from. And that's why they all parrot the same talking points.
Right. And it's, there was a moment, by the way, as an aside, there was a moment where journalism started to make the right step. I thought there used to be a time when, do you remember this when the news would be, they would say something, well, you probably don't listen to mainstream media news much anymore, neither do I, but they would at least make an attempt for a while to say, by the way, full disclosure, CNN is owned by Time Warner or whatever. And so they would let you know publicly that there was a conflict of interest potentially in what they're saying. They're like, I'm going to report on a story about Time Warner. And by the way, just full disclosure, they own our company. And that was a step in the right direction, but I don't see them doing that anymore, giving you that little caveat of who owns them.
No, they don't touch things that would reflect poorly on the people that finance and the people that do a lot of the advertising on those news channels. They don't even touch those issues.
Yeah, they did, it seemed like, for a little while, and I was like, well, that's a step in the right direction, but I don't hear them doing that anymore, really.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to add just popped into my
Yeah,
head. We talked about this, you and I. There's a lot of quote unquote independent people that are out
yeah,
there that we all watch. You know, we see them online. They have huge platforms that are very strategic about how they address certain topics. And I've seen it. I'm sure all the people listening have seen it, where somebody brings something up in an interview and the host puts a
quickly
really
redirects.
quick halt to
Right.
that and tries to steer it in another direction. And
Yeah.
if you pay attention, it's pretty obvious. It's happened a lot. I've seen it many times, even recently. And so that's really no different than the mainstream media being influenced by financial interests. A lot of quote unquote independents do the same thing.
You know, I feel like I need a side tangent because, again, this is one of my cases, and I don't know that you follow it at all, but you know, Luigi Mangione is a perfect example. If you look at any mainstream media news station like a Fox or a CNN, a third or more, probably more, of the commercials are pharmaceutical companies, right? Every ad is ask your doctor about this, ask your doctor. They're literally, their major advertisers now are pharmaceutical companies. How likely do you feel that the media is not influenced to say positive things about the pharmaceutical companies and the health insurance industry as a whole? It's tied into pharmaceutical companies, and how, you know, how likely is that to influence how they treat a story like Luigi Mangione, for example? Because again, whether or not they do it on purpose or not, when you're in bed and taking large paychecks, you do not want to piss off your moneymakers. And if a big portion, half your money is coming from pharmaceutical companies, you're probably going to say things that are going to be pro pharmacy, pro medical industry, pro insurance, all the things that are paying your bills, and demonize anything that looks like. And if you even remotely start to go down the, well, maybe, you know, maybe there's another side of the story, well, then you're going to lose half your money. So are you going to play ball or not? You know?
You're way more eloquent than I am about it. I would be more like a sledgehammer when I talk about this. I would go so far as to say that you can't trust the mainstream media at all, even on things they don't have to provide misinformation on, they do.
Yeah.
And someone might say, Joe, what do you mean, man? You know, that's a little conspiratorial. How can you have legitimate journalism when you're steering the so-called journalists towards certain talking points and away from others? That's not journalism. And I don't
Right.
think we've had actual investigative journalism in this country in a very long time. I mean, just look at everything that's happening. I mean, look at from Idaho 4 to the Luigi Mangione case to now the Charlie Kirk case. It's it should be plain and obvious to anybody that we're being lied to about things, right? I mean, so many
Right.
things have come out regarding the Charlie Kirk case recently that shed light on the fact that they're not telling the truth about things. And they're feeding ridiculous narratives, narratives that a child wouldn't believe, and expecting people to just swallow it and not question it.
Yeah, and I hate to bring this up again because, again, it sounds like I'm anti-Trump, and I'm not anti anything. I don't give a rip about the political parties. But again, it kind of almost really ramped up when Trump started going on he kind of coined that movement of calling things fake news. So if you're telling a story other than what I'm telling you, then you're fake news. You're not real. And that became an erosion of the media's, you know, oversight of the government. Because if you're told by the president of the United States, if you don't go with my narrative, you're fake news, and I'll just stop inviting you to the White House to conferences and stuff like that, because your news agency is no longer legitimate. You talk about fake news, and that's that slippery slope. If you can convince America that there's real news, which is whatever you're saying, and everything else is fake news, then you can then use that as a tool to say, well, you know what, we don't let news agencies into the White House that aren't real news agencies. You're not a real news agency because you don't go along with the program.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, look at what the media has become. It's everything is politicized, right? Every mainstream pundit and and large scale content creator finds a way to spin every single thing into a political narrative. They
Yeah.
always take that angle, and it's profitable, right? But it ties in with things that I've been saying for a long, long time: divide and conquer. It
Yeah.
sounds overly simplistic, but just watch and see how everything is about right versus left.
Yeah.
Anything that
Yeah.
doesn't fit into that narrative gets pushed aside. And
Yeah.
again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it ties into the things that we're going to talk about. And we got some big things coming down the pipe that we're going to talk about that dig even deeper into this type of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Joe and I talked about the topics that we want to talk about on Deep Devils. We've got probably 3 years. We've probably got 3 years of topics, literally like just a title of talking about psyops or this or that or whatever. And those things can be an hour conversation. So we've got a lot of stuff we want to cover. I hope you're going to enjoy the deeper dives into stuff. Again, it's not so humorous. A little less ranty. I often rant, and I haven't even gone on a rant on Deep Devils yet,
I
but
want you to
that's
rant,
okay.
dude. I want you to let it fly, please.
I'm sure it'll happen at some point. Just piss me off and I'll go with it, Joe. But all right, let's talk about Project Mockingbird now. 1963 wiretap. This is that thing where I said at the beginning that maybe people get confused on Operation versus Project Mockingbird. Project Mockingbird, 1963 wiretap, CIA wiretapping of columnists, news columnists, right? Robert Allen and Paul Scott, March through June 1963, labeled Project Mockingbird. Project Mockingbird was a short-term wiretap operation of journalists, not media recruitment program. Here's the difference. Media recruitment is what we're talking about with the Operation Mockingbird, which is literally paying journalists to be in your back pocket and to do what you want them to do. This was wiretapping, listening in on reporters to see what they're covering, what they're talking about, things like that. Different type of operation, not the same thing. Operation Mockingbird, Project Mockingbird. Important to keep the separation from the broader operation claims. Do you have any thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, well, Operation Mockingbird, as we're referring to it, also speaks about how the CIA actually had CIA operatives working in the media, and they downplay that angle, but it's proven. It came out that they did. They had actual CIA operatives working for publishers,
And
including.
let's take a minute to talk about that, Joe, because I think what you're talking about is the difference between the CIA says, "Hey, I'll give you $50,000 and I want you to talk about this," and saying, "Hey, we brought you through the CIA ranks and we taught you and trained you, and then we embedded you with journalism like you're a journalist." That what you're talking about, the difference between a CIA operative in the media versus a paid relationship.
Yeah, and it also, if you look at examples we'll get to about today, that now it's covered up just like it always was, but there's a lot of information that supports that some of the larger um, news people, personalities in the mainstream media were actually working on behalf of the CIA.
Like
And
an
it's
Anderson Cooper, maybe, or
Anderson Cooper,
was
Tucker.
allegedly.
Yeah, well, he worked for he internship with the CIA,
Yeah.
and if you look it up, there's actual information stating that you know he was trained by the CIA in broadcasting and media. And then there's other people that have spoken about how people that they had worked with at the big networks that were working for the CIA. They didn't give their names, they didn't expose them, but they've talked about it. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about a thing that came out somewhat recently about a couple of other big name people.
Well,
That's
am I pushing it too far to? I'm going to make an analogy, and you tell me whether you think I'm pushing it too far. If we, for example, in a country, uh, have an engineer who works for the CIA, and then goes to a foreign country and poses as an engineer to help build something, but he really works for the CIA and embeds in a foreign country saying, "I'm just an engineer." That's what we might call a spy, right? A U.S. citizen who works for the intelligence agency who poses himself as, I'm just an engineer, I'm going to help you make something, not disclosing that he's paid for and trained and bought by the CIA. And if the foreign intelligence finds out that that person works for the CIA, we would call that they found a spy, right? And that kind of thing happens all the time. How much different is it if you have paid CIA informants that are embedded in the media, who it's not disclosed that they work for the CIA, but they're in your media rooms and they're, I mean, how different is that? Am I over pushing that connection?
No, I mean, I think, have you heard of the term a knock?
No, I'm not sure.
It's a CIA term, non-official cover, right?
Okay,
So people get selected that make it into the CIA to be a knock,
right.
non-official cover position. And that's, they would work in clandestine operations, right? So nobody else in the regular ranks would know about them and what they're doing. And they give you a cover position. It may be in another country where you're an art dealer, or you're a newspaper reporter, or you're a foreign correspondent for a major news outlet, right? So you're not, it's not official, meaning if you get caught, they disavow any connection. Because if you get caught up in an international scandal, they're going to say, we had no idea of this person. It's like associated with black ops, right? Stuff that even Congress doesn't know about.
Yeah, right. By the way, that's a perfect example of deep topics you and I are going to go into. We're going to talk about black budgets and black money, and and how those things. That's going to be another thing that we're going to dive into deep. I do want to say, I want to oversimplify it, but see if you can riff on it as well. Maybe not everybody in America understands a little bit of the difference between the CIA and the FBI, for example. In theory, maybe it's an oversimplification. The CIA was supposed to be dealing with international relationships. It's our foreign adversaries. It's an intelligence apparatus for basically making sure that our country is safe and we're protecting it from foreign adversaries. Whereas the FBI is more of an internal thing, right? So the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to look into crimes committed on our soil and whatever. That's kind of a simplistic way of how they're supposed to be different. The CIA shouldn't be, in my opinion, embedding themselves with U.S. journalists spying on things in America, because the CIA is kind of more of an international thing. But they muddy the waters with, hey, it's all in the matter of national security, and so I don't know. I just thought I'd try to elaborate a little bit on the differences between the agencies.
Yeah, and it's also, what do you believe as far as official stories go, right? The story forever is the CIA is outward facing, the FBI is inward facing. But there's been a lot of books written about operations that the CIA has done that they weren't supposed to be doing in America. And there's a lot
Right.
of really good books about that that we'll recommend. I mean, Chaos is one. They talk about an operation that was going on. Had a lot to do with the whole hippie movement in the 60s and the Manson family. Netflix did a documentary about it. It's called
Yeah.
Chaos. And there's
And
been,
there's, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, there's been, I'm just pointing out that there's been a lot of examples where they're doing things they're not supposed to do. So,
Right.
yes, that's
And
the
it,
official story. They're outward facing. They don't
yep.
conduct operations in America. We all know what the NSA was doing with the Edward Snowden whistleblower story. So, it's really, what do you want to believe? Do you want to believe that and say, "Oh no, they're really keeping us safe"?
Right.
I tend to not lean that way.
And I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but it's well documented in my opinion, and I would want to put receipts behind it. But there's been allegations for the long time that the CIA and that whole doing things overseas things will seize Colombian cocaine, for example, and help smuggle it into the United States and bring it into the US, or poppy fields in Afghanistan and help bring it into the United States. So the lines get blurred on the overseas operations when it comes back into the homeland, and the CIA is involved in it. But that's maybe, well, not maybe, it is a story for another day. And I'm sure we'll dive into that in the future. Let
Yeah,
me
well,
advance the
yeah,
slide here.
black ops were when they
Yeah.
couldn't get funding for them through Congress, they would do activities like be involved in trafficking of certain things, and
Yeah.
um, you know, t- dealing in some shady stuff, some unsavory stuff in other countries in order to fund their operations that they couldn't get approved in Congress.
Yeah, and right, and I didn't mean to side tangent on it that long, but you're exactly right. That allows that, so you only get so much of a budget from Congress. But you know what? If you get into the, I hate to say it, you get into the drug business, and all of a sudden you've got a big fat budget that's not even approved and it's off the books that you can do things with. So, but that's, again, it's getting a little deeper than we probably should get right now. Moving forward with the Operation Mockingbird history, Rolling Stone magazine, another big moment. These are the two big articles. We talked about the Ramparts magazine and now Rolling Stone, another journalistic breakthrough. And again, when journalism is done right, that's when we blow the lid off of shit. And if Congress follows up, then Congress does a congressional hearing and there's blowback. And that's how we learn about shit a lot of times. But when the problem comes, when the media starts being paid for by the government, then they stop doing their job as a gatekeeper for the government. I went on a huge side tangent, almost a rant, Joe. I almost went to the rant level, but I didn't quite get there.
Come on, man.
Anyways,
just give me at least one rant.
I'm working up to it. I'll get pissed off here eventually. So a reporter in the Rolling Stone magazine, which again, I'm going to try to link for you in the show notes. A reporter found that over 400 U.S. press members carried out assignments for the USA. And I believe their names were listed, I think, in that report. Maybe it was in the congressional hearing where the names were listed, but reporter, I think, listed the names of the people who are found to be press members who are on assignment by the CIA, embedded in U.S. media. So that's a problem. They had found the Rolling Stone journalism article found that there's a far wider CIA press tie naming high-profile figures. Bernstein was the author of that, right? Reporting remains highly cited to this day. So Bernstein's article in Rolling Stone, monumental piece in breaking Operation Mockingbird, which again, not an official title of a document. So some people will try to, oh, Bernstein was full of shit. There is no project Mockingbird, and yet you're fundamentally ignoring what he revealed was the CIA had embedded with members of journalism. Over 400 names were named, and so on. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's a really long article too. It's pretty comprehensive. And he was one of the guys involved with the Watergate story, right? Him and Woodward.
Woodward
Bob
and Bernstein,
Woodward
yeah.
won a Pulitzer Prize for their article about the Watergate scandal. But now we're going to put just a little tinfoil hat on, just a small one.
Sweet.
I've heard numerous things and rumblings over the years that Woodward was actually CIA. So, and people that actually gave accounts that were around back then and had connections to people. You can find that information. It's out there. Again, this touches on another topic that's very much related to this, which is that of a limited hangout. Do you mind if I give a real quick synopsis?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Limited hangouts is a term when they release information about maybe a really controversial operation or something that was hidden from the public, and they give you a chunk of information, but it's not the real meat of the important stuff that they were doing that might have been unsavory. So it's enough to sort of satiate people and make them think they're getting the real story. But it doesn't go all the way. It doesn't give you all of the information. And
Right.
it's a way of sort of giving the appearance of being truthful and
Yeah.
being transparent, but it doesn't really give you all of the information. A limited hangout, even information that's crazy. For example,
Yeah.
if information about something comes out 30 years, 40 years after that nefarious shit went down, there's nothing that can be done about it. So it doesn't matter that a chunk of this information comes out then, right? It didn't come out when it was really important and something could have been done about it. So that's also, in my opinion, tied in with a limited hangout. Someone changing their opinion about the Iraq War, 25 years later, and trying to present themselves as like this hero figure because they had a change of heart. That's a form of a limited hangout because they might have had the influence to have said something about it when it was happening, but they didn't. So that gives the appearance that they're a changed person, they're a straight shooter.
Yeah, right. Right. And and not to get too heavy into a side tangent, but that's exactly like, if you give a little bit of the details that make you look bad, it makes it look like you've done your due diligence and you, well, hey, we did look into something and we found this, and it's a small piece of the puzzle. And then, like you said, over 10, 20, 30 years, more details come out. And if you were to go back and say, shit, so in other words, if you had told everything at the same time, we'd be much more pissed off. But you kind of did the whole frog in the pot boiled thing and let us kind of like, oh, it's just this piece of information. And you felt, okay, well, they did their due diligence. And then later on, you're like, oh, and we also did this. You're like, okay, maybe I can accept that. And oh, by the way, we also did this. You're like, fuck, like, why didn't you tell us all that on day one? Well, because if you release it slowly over time, people just kind of like, oh, okay, they did their looking into it. Oh, well, maybe there was a bit more. Well, maybe there was a bit more.
Right.
So
And the relationship this has with this Operation Mockingbird premise is that if you have people in the media, or nowadays, I believe, large content creators that are paid content creators, you know, you can make it seem like they're opposed to certain things. But if you pay attention, and we talked about this today, those people, when certain topics come up, they steer it back to what they were talking about.
yeah,
They deliberately avoid certain topics, and there's a lot of belief that they're paid by certain interests, very
right,
specific interests. It's related to the Charlie Kirk case. We've heard a lot about it. We won't get too deep into it now. But I would say to most people, what I want to get across with us doing this and this particular information is pay attention to how people shift the narrative, how they steer it in certain directions and away from certain things. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it, and
yeah,
then you start to notice it more and more.
yeah. Yeah, and and you're right. It's a skill that people need to develop, which is starting to realize when they're purposely avoiding going down a certain road or steering it towards a certain way. And it's a skill that I think more Americans have to get. Journalism apparently is not going to do it, so we have to kind of do it, and we have to get better. I think, in my opinion, that's one of my personal side tangents. Is what I'm trying to do on this show, and I think what you want to do as well is you want to help educate people to get better at seeing the telltale signs of being manipulated, of the story being shaped, of the narrative, and then starting to ask better questions.
All right, can I
So
drop a little bomb? Just a little one?
yeah, yeah,
Okay, maybe within the last month, Alex Jones had a former Delta Force guy on, and we're talking about the Charlie Kirk assassination. So it was like right after the assassination. And, he was introducing the guy. They started getting into a little discussion, and the guy brought up Israel, right? The Delta Force guy. And if people don't know, Delta Force is like one of the highest special forces there is. Very,
yeah,
very specific, the things that they do. And the second he brought that up, it was like, hey, oh, we're going to go to commercial, everybody. And Alex Jones just shut it down so fast. And when they came, and he said, well, we'll get back into that after the commercial. And when they came back, he did touch on it a little bit, but he quickly steered it away
yeah,
from the topic of Israel. So you can
yeah,
look it up. You can find it. It's the one with the Delta Force guy.
yeah, and that kind of shit's hilarious. I want to say there was a famous one of those that happened where someone did the whole alive thing, and they did the whole, oh, let's go to commercial break, and they didn't, and we heard them say, something to the effect of, we're not talking about that shit on here, kind of thing. And I wish I could find that clip, because it was one of those things where they thought they had cut, and they're like having that off-camera conversation, which is that, yeah, that shit we're not going to talk about here, and it's like, you're still alive.
Yeah, well, one of the ones that's talked about a lot that I think I mentioned to you is Stephen Colbert had Claire Danes on, who's been in
Uh-huh.
that series Homeland. It's about the CIA.
Yeah,
And he's like, so do they have special training? Do you guys get like consultants that come in? And she's just, talking, just all happy go lucky, like, oh yeah, they actually had like a sort of like a school for us that was like taught by a CIA person. And he's like, oh, really? Tell me about that. And she's like, something, you can look it up, something to this effect. Well, with the current administration, alluding to Trump. So this
Yeah.
might have been in Trump's first term. I'm not even sure if
Yeah.
it was this term or the last term. And she said, yeah. And, so what they're doing now is the CIA's partnering with journalists. And he's like, whoa! Stephen Colbert had a seizure, threw his hand up, and
Whoa!
he
That's not.
shut that down so fast. It's great. You got to watch it. It's
It,
fantastic.
yes, and that's the kind of shit people need to wake up to. Those little moments of, oh shit, like you didn't just say that we're embedded with journalism, because yes, that's happening, and that's what we're talking about. Wake up, this is happening. By the way, as an aside, and this is going to be an episode I want to do a whole special on about the government, which branch or whatever. I'm going to say allegedly for now because I'm not bringing you the receipts, and I don't want to get in trouble with anything like that. Allegedly, they will. This has been a known thing in Hollywood. You have a show. I'm going to give an example, and it's an alleged example. An example. If, for example, the United States is going after terrorists, and there's a popular show on like 20, what was the show with Kiefer Sutherland? Was it called 24? The one
24,
where,
yeah.
yeah. So if there, so in America, for example, we don't believe in torturing people. We will, our public stance is we don't torture people. And then they had this sliding slope of sending people to other countries that do practice torture, and you have them rendered in another country so that they can torture them, then we can say we didn't do it, kind of thing. But then you have an episode of 24 come out where Kiefer Sutherland has to stop something horrendous happening on American soil and tortures somebody to get that information, literally tortures them on camera. And those kind of episodes, you would be stunned to find who funds those episodes. The government funding an episode, for example, of a fictional TV series to make Americans rethink. Maybe it's okay to torture somebody in certain circumstances, because I like that Kiefer Sutherland guy, man, he stopped the bad guy. And so if you start to blur the lines when episodes, and this happens, I believe we can show receipts. I will be able to show receipts that the government has paid for episodes. Hey, by the way, you've got CSI. If you do an episode about Arab terrorists and you have this, and this happen to it, and you show the FBI in a positive light, we'll give you money from the FBI for helping promote the FBI and make people want to become FBI agents because you'll show them in a really cool light. And so they pay for certain episodes, and some of TV stations and stuff like that will take that money to say, yeah, absolutely, we can do an episode about that, and it shapes public opinion when we see it,
Well, you talked about something that I have in my notes, and that is the long time relationship between the CIA and Hollywood, and it goes way back. I mean, we could get crazy, but
I think we're going to, by the way, because we have planned to do a whole episode on the CIA and Hollywood.
Yeah, we'll get more specific with it, but back in the 60s, the CIA had a film studio at the top of Laurel Canyon. And there's a crazy book. It goes out there, but it's very entertaining. It's called Weird Scenes in the Canyon, and it's something like the CIA, the hippie movement, and the dark heart of the 60s. It's like one of those subtitles. And it talks all about the connections that Laurel Canyon, a lot of the famous musicians' families were connected to like military intelligence and high level military stuff and royalty going back really far. And then you think about, they all end up in this one small little community outside of Hollywood. And it just so happens that there's a CIA film studio right at the top of Laurel Canyon. And so with Hollywood, there's rumors, and it's hard to confirm a lot of this stuff because it's like it's always removed. It's like it's this production company, right? You don't know
hidden behind another company,
right? Who funds that? What they call a cutout company or a front company, like Zero Dark 30. That's the whole official narrative of the Osama bin Laden raid, right? What was the movie that the Obamas produced? It was on Netflix with Julia Roberts. Oh man,
I'm blanking.
I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. It's like a propaganda movie.
Yeah,
I mean, and then Civil War, that movie Civil War. It's like there's so many things. And I have read about this stuff, the connections to Hollywood. I mean, you remember the crazy movie Confessions of a Dangerous Mind?
Yep.
About what's his name? Barris, the guy who did the Gong Show.
Yeah.
He wrote
I haven't seen. Yeah, go ahead.
He wrote the book, basically. I think it was called Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, where in it he was a CIA assassin. George Clooney played his handler.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, and to be fair, we're getting ahead of our Hollywood show, but the bottom line is that it's when we're talking about the government embedding in the media, it goes further. It goes into the Hollywood, and it goes into, I mean, and that shape people don't. It's like brainwashing. You're, especially when it's done in your fictional shows. But again, like I feel like we may be getting too far ahead in the Hollywood thing because we've got a whole episode about that coming. But it's
Well,
the point taken. It's the
I
same
think
kind of
we
thing.
can, when we talk about that, we'll bring receipts and show clips and
That's what we
things
need
like
to
that.
do. Yeah,
And we'll
yeah, we need to
zero
bring
in on
receipts.
actual clips and say, what do you think they're trying to get across with this clip? What's the message they're trying to push?
And by
And
the, I can't not do this. Like I'm trying to get off of it, but yet I remember the Bush administration had been accused, and I think proven, and I should caveat this is by memory, so I can't, about paying for an actual news report with a staged scene in a hospital that didn't exist, and it was actors, and they put it out there in the news like it was real news, that like they were alleging that people were taking babies out of incubators and throwing them on the floor kind of thing, and the whole thing was like staged and produced by like a Hollywood company and put out there as news. And again,
right.
I shouldn't have said that because I can't remember all the. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have
Yeah,
you
I
heard
know
about that?
exactly what you're talking about. I think that was Iraq, right? That
Yeah, it
was
was in
when
Iraq,
they were
right?
trying to boost public support for invading Iraq, you know,
Right.
based on weapons of mass destruction. They threw out a bunch of different
Just to
propaganda.
poison the American people against Iraqis to say, look at how barbaric they are. They literally throw babies on the floor, kind of thing. And that shit, got put out there as news, and it shapes public opinion.
Yeah.
I'm off on a tangent, but
No, but look, this is all related. This is
yeah,
100% related to what we're talking about. The bigger message is, and it's also interesting to talk about this stuff. The bigger message is propaganda and psychological operations have been going on for decades and decades. And worse, I've got some stuff on the back burner that I want us to dig into that are really, really controversial things that have become like a focus of mine as far as research. But that's down the road. We don't want to scare people too soon because this one is a crazy one. But
I'm excited where I'm excited where this show is going. I think people should get a lot out of it. I'm really hopeful for people that they enjoy this presentation.
can I
And we're
just
not done, by the way. It sounds like I'm wrapping up. We're not done. We're still
no?
working on
Can
Project
I just
Mockingbird.
give a little drop another rant before we
Yeah, yeah,
change slides here? The reason why I talk about this stuff, the reason why you and I have talked about this stuff, is because so many people that I've talked to, they literally don't believe that conspiracies like this take place. And
right.
my brain can't even fathom that with the amount of information that's out there. But some people don't seek it out, and I get it. They just kind of go along, they watch the news, but
Yeah,
I believe that it's all these things that are related to the reason why we're in such a fucked up place right now in society. Sorry, I dropped the F bomb, but
feel free, man. I got
it's
a lot
it's
of them.
just look at everybody. Come on, I don't care what your political beliefs are. Look at how screwed up things are right now. I mean, we are. If you pay attention to what's going on, we're in a bad place in the world, and the things that are happening in our country and in other countries, which just so happen to align with the stated goals of these big globalist organizations like the World Economic Forum. They literally have openly talked about this stuff for years. A surveillance state, you'll own nothing and be happy. All these things that you've heard about, that's been what they have talked about for years to build consensus for these types of things. And now they're happening. So all the shit that people were saying was a conspiracy theory 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, is playing out right now. And
Yeah,
so what I want is, don't trust me, think I'm crazy, I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not selling anything. It's like,
yeah,
wake up and see what's really happening. Because if more people can wake up, right, that's the first step. That's the
yeah. Absolutely.
first step. You can't make anything happen when half of the country and half of the world
Is asleep.
is asleep.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
anyway, I'm sorry.
No, it's great. And it's funny because I just realized I should be, when we go on these long rants, I should be bringing this up on bigger screen, one, to kind of change stuff up from people just looking at a slide that we're not talking directly about. So I'm going to try to get that. I'm going to try to shift that a little bit next time we do that, because I'm improving this show as we go on the fly, like literally improving the show on the fly as we go. So let's keep going through the slides. Myth or real? Many later writers described a vast centralized program they called Operation Mockingbird, which they claim exists. Scholars, however, note the evidence for a single formal program by that name is thin, which is where I talked about at the very beginning. People say, well, Operation Mockingbird proved to me that exists. It doesn't, so quit talking about it because it's not real, even when you bring receipts. The conduct, however, the relationships, the placements, the subsidies is well documented. So that's what we're talking about right here. Quit narrative shaping and go, it doesn't exist because you can't find a document that says Operation Mockingbird. So therefore, everything you're talking about and all the concepts and all the receipts you're providing that the CIA has been embedded with the media and there's names and figures who have been paid, that all must not be true if you can't find a document that says Operation Mockingbird. Don't be that stupid, is where I'm going with that. Let's see. How it worked. Use of stringers and freelancers abroad. Again, it doesn't have to be the mainstream media. You have just freelancers to do reports and get into a magazine and write an article for a magazine. It doesn't have to be owned by Rolling Stone or whatever. It could be independent journalists. Covert subsidies and cover jobs, placement of stories and leads via foreign desks. Again, the CIA should be working maybe with foreign entities and not our U.S. Media. The aim was to shape foreign reporting and gather intel. Editorial control claims vary by outlet and era. So where we're getting with that again is the idea is that during that, it's kind of like this slide should have been further ago, which is the idea that this started in the Cold War for propaganda that was supposed to be used outside of the US, but it's been increasingly used inside US borders. Government denial. David P. Hadley's The Rising Clamor 2019 noted that limited specifics left space for exaggerated claims about the unified Operation Mockingbird. So this is somebody saying all of this shit, everything you and Joe are talking about right now, you're morons. It never happened. I'm just going to tell you that you're exaggerating things. So you've got a report where there are a few reporters, okay, maybe 400, I don't know. But the point being is you're over exaggerating it. It wasn't that big of a deal. Historians accept CIA press ties happened. They dispute the scope and the structure implied by Operation Mockingbird and label in some secondary work. So that's the bottom line. They're trying to say people like us who are trying to show America what's been happening and bring you some receipts. Joe and I are overstating things. It's not really a big problem. What do you think about that?
Yeah, again, I don't know. Some people are more inclined to believe quote unquote official sources. And if you just look at how many things we've been lied to about, that doesn't mean that, well, for me personally, I don't believe anything that comes from the mainstream media, even things that are totally inconsequential. So, of course, you're going to have people that try to downplay it, right? That's damage control. When information gets leaked, like what happened with the Epstein files, right?
Yeah.
A lot of information got out to the public, and then a lot of people started talking about it. A lot of content creators, a lot of independent, big, high-level podcasts and things with millions of followers. And so they have to do damage control, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to say, oh, they're exaggerating it. It's really this, and they'll spin it. That's part of what the media does. They spin things. And it's like a PR damage control campaign. They try to
it's amazing to me that the burden of proof seems to be on us and not on the government. Like, it's just a large portion of society just accepts anything the media and the government tells them. And if you say that's not what's happening, we have to freaking go through Herculean efforts to convince them otherwise. But they just readily accept the narrative without having to think. Like, why is it when the government tells you something, you don't go, prove to me that that really happened that way? Shouldn't say no one. A lot of people don't challenge the government, but they make us have to work our ass off to prove that the narrative that was put out there that they accepted in 2 seconds is incorrect, and we have to prove that it's not, instead of the other way around.
And a recent example of this was, I'm not a fan of Elon Musk or anything like that, but he did the whole Doge audit of the government, right? So they go in, they find all these NGOs and all this money, billions and billions of dollars funneled into these NGOs for crazy things, which looks a lot like a money laundering operation, right? Taxpayer money that gets funneled into these things in other countries, these preposterous things, right? So they uncover all these things that were a conspiracy beforehand, right? Now, by the way, USAID, for anybody out there, if you haven't read the book, we'll talk about this in more in the future. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It's a national, international bestseller. John Perkins, the author, says in the book, USAID is a CIA front company, right? And this is not a brand new book. It's been out for a while. It was a New
Yeah.
York Times bestseller. All right, so he reveals that information, that book, and a lot of other crazy things. Now, Elon Musk goes in, he uncovers all this crazy spending, right? But they can't even track it and show where it actually went. And then what happens after that? Two things. Nothing happens to any of the people that were involved, right? Nothing whatsoever. Nobody was held accountable. Nobody faced any consequences. And then what? A huge wave of people going on podcasts, going on these different programs. Oh, people are now starving in these countries because the aid's not getting to them. They send in their PR and their damage control people to try to spin the narrative to say, no, USAID is a good thing. It's look at all these people that it's helped, right? So
Yeah.
it's an information war,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I'm not a big fan of Alex Jones, but what's his platform called? InfoWars, right?
Yeah. Right.
It is an information war. It's a war of
It
information.
is.
Information
Yeah,
comes
and I
out.
think his tagline is "There's a war on for your mind," and a lot of that was that resonated. Again, not saying I'm a fan of Alex Jones or whatever, but the point Alex Jones, but there's a war on for your mind is how I really think that things are happening in this country as well. There's a war on for your mind to make you think certain ways and to make you shut down critical thinking.
Right. And again, tangent, we could go off on many, many tangents, but this is all related because this is related to the control of information. So you have the CIA who has a vested interest in pushing certain narratives. So what are they going to do? How do you do that? Well, you get people that are either working in the media who are friendly to the cause, who are willing to work on your behalf, or you get publishers that are maybe you pay them. I don't know. I'm sure we'll never hear about that. And they embed CIA people in the media, right?
Let me
To
let me
control information.
let me riff for a moment. And I want to make sure people understand that right now I'm spitballing off the top of my head. I didn't even think all this through, but I want to point out something. We use national security to hide a lot of shit in this country. If you just say it's a matter of national security, you get to hide everything that you're doing. Now, let's talk about I'm just spitballing this, a thing like Charlie Kirk. And if you add the idea that our government, like the CIA, has embedded in the media, can you not see a scenario, any scenario, that's all I'm asking, any scenario in which, let's say Charlie Kirk has rumors swirling around him about his ties to Israel or his turning on Israel, or the Jeffrey Epstein pushing the idea that Jeffrey Epstein was maybe a Mossad agent or involved in Israeli intelligence. If that happened, can you not see any plausible scenario in which the CIA would say, look, this is a matter of national security. We must propagandize the United States to not let them know what's going on these international fronts. This has to do with foreign governments, and therefore it is our territory. Foreign governments is what the CIA does. We are now going to use a propaganda tool to make sure America thinks a certain way about this and doesn't look at another issue. Now, again, I'm not saying that's what's happening in this case, but I'm saying, can you see with a project like Mockingbird, where the CIA has been exposed as embedding journalism, that they might see, hey, this is a national security issue. We need to make sure America thinks a certain way about this and doesn't look at something that would bolster our enemies' positions or whatever.
Yeah, and another sort of narrative they could easily say, well, all these other countries that are our sworn enemies use this type of information
Yes.
control, and it's in our best interest for national security that we do the same. The same thing, the narrative that's being pushed about AI. well, we have to keep up with China and we have to keep up with Russia and all these other countries. So we have to basically have this all, it's manufacturing consent. It's what we talked about in the last
Yeah.
episode. If you
And right,
can,
and it's not a stretch. We've already stated, I should say, we as in members of our government have already stated, foreign countries are trying to influence American politics and American public by using things like Facebook and creating bot farms and making fights in America so that they can destabilize our country. If that's what they're saying is happening, why wouldn't they also say, look, you got to fight fire with fire? We're going to have to be able to manipulate America's minds to combat what they're doing. So, and you could see how they might justify it, like, hey, we have to. We can't stop them from getting into Facebook and YouTube or whatever the case, and try to win Americans' minds. So now we're going to wage a war on Americans' minds and try to win them over and push our narrative. So, I mean, it's just, maybe it's not a stretch, or maybe it is a stretch. I don't know. But
all right, let me ask you a question. We're talking about Operation Mockingbird and these other things, right? What do you think is more likely, that the CIA and the NSA and the other security agencies, that they're doing these things to protect Americans, or are they doing these things for bigger financial interests?
well, I mean, you noticed I laughed when you said they're doing it to protect Americans, because right off the bat, I already know the answer for myself, which is that follow the money. It's almost always protecting your financial interests and your business interests and who you're in bed with globally. So that's why I laughed. Like, it's I personally, and maybe I'm a cynic, maybe I'm an asshole, but I personally don't think that we do things for altruistic reasons. We're not doing it because it's the right thing to do. We do it because it's protecting somebody's financial interests, business interests, or maybe you can say the nation's interest, if you say it's in the nation's. Because, by the way, as an aside, Joe, and I realize this is like a big topic for this, but there's an idea that says, look, protecting big business in America is a national security issue. Like, we want to be the leaders in the world in any kind of industry. So we would want to wage war against other countries to make their industry look like it's not as important and our American products are superior and our whatever. And that's in the interest of big business. So there's a fine line between national security and protecting your financial interest and your financial partners.
Yeah, and then when you look at how much control the financial sector has over our government, how can you trust that they're doing it for our benefit, right? When you see things like all the fraud and waste and abuse of was uncovered with USAID with the Doge stuff, and when you see all these things that come out over time, it's like the financial sector of the world, the global banking, right, has so much control, right? They shouldn't be allowed to have that much control. Three banks, investment banks, should not be able to own majority shares and huge shares in so many massive companies, right? But
Right.
everybody, in my opinion, everybody's on the take, right? And they're more interested in financial gain. And I don't know how many people I can say in our government that I believe actually represent what's best for the American citizens. I can maybe name one or two, if
It's been a
that.
long time since I've seen it, but we need to get one of those updated infographics that I've seen it before in the past, right? About how all of America is essentially owned by 5 corporations, and every little company can tie up to like the same 5 people. It's like, how the hell did we get to a point where everything is, when you follow the chain up, is owned by a very small number of corporations at the very top, and it's scary. But we can do that on another episode as well.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out to Ian Carroll. If anybody watches his content, a while back he did a whole episode about who owns what companies. And is there like a mega corporation that basically owns everything? And he literally goes through and shows the connections, which major banks and what other banks own those major banks, and it ties it all together. And if I highly recommend his content. He goes pretty hard in the paint against corruption, a lot of the stuff that's going on now, and he's pretty heavily covering the Charlie Kirk assassination as well.
I think in the future we're gonna have to drink alcohol when we do this show, because this is pretty deep stuff. I feel like there's no room for humor and levity
Oh,
in these kind of
yeah.
situations because it's so deep and so heavy. I
Let's
think
pour
we're
a
getting
drink right now, man. We'll just
right.
throw on back.
I got a good tolerance. I'd have to be at it for a while before I could get there. but but I feel like we're getting kind of closer to the end of our slides. In fact, I'm waiting any second now for the next slide to pop up and go like, you're at the end of this thing. But implications, let's talk a little about this. Conflicts of interest when your journalists serve as intel assets, loss of trust in mainstream media, which I think you and I for sure already there. And by the way, I would argue America. I can't remember the last stat I said, but I read. I think there was a very recent study. Frick, I hope you remember it. Maybe correct me. Something like only 30% of Americans trust mainstream media at this point. It seems like it's a really, really low thing. So at least in that regards, maybe people are waking up to not trusting mainstream media. Now, the only reason I caveat that before I take a breath is it political still? Is it like, oh, well, yeah, you can't trust those liberals who run the media and it's a conservative versus liberal thing, or whether America as itself as a whole, like everyone is starting to wake up? I don't know. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you remember hearing any stats like that?
Yeah, I recently heard that too. I think it was like 32 or 33%. Really, really low. I think a lot of people have woken up, and I think I don't necessarily think X, formerly Twitter, is free speech, in my opinion. Um, I think a lot of censoring is done behind the scenes. However, it did allow a lot of people that were truth seekers and truth tellers back on, and it did allow for conversations about controversial subjects.
Yeah.
Now, some may say too little, too late, damage is already done, but I think the reason why the trust is so low in the media, I think awakenings happen. It's like tipping points, right? We've all heard that term.
Yeah.
The tipping points happen, and I think, in my opinion, right now, the powers that be are panicking. And that is why I believe the acceleration of the push towards totalitarianism and censorship and surveillance has ramped up so dramatically
Yeah.
because they see the awakening happening. They take the temperature of the dialogue that's online, right? Because they're monitoring it, and
Yeah.
they see that a lot of people are waking up. So they're never going to say, you guys are right. We're totally corrupt. We don't work for you. That's never going to happen, right? They don't want people coming over the wall, right? The wall of the
Yeah.
kingdom.
And
So
if,
they have to
one of the
go
things we're
hard.
yeah, and one of the things we need to, I mean, one of the things I think you and I have to do a show on sometime is while there are platforms, even YouTube, to a sense, allows you to get away with a lot of stuff that mainstream media wouldn't talk about. So, I thank you, YouTube, for allowing us to do that. And X, I bet, again, you can see a lot of things on X that you can't see even on YouTube. So there's good moments, but I feel like we need to talk about the elephant in the room, which is that algorithms are going to start shaping freedom of speech, right? Because they always say it's not a matter of freedom of speech; it's a matter of freedom of reach, right? So Joe and Lee can talk about all they want, but the algorithm aren't going to push their ass out to a large public if they're saying things that we don't like. So at what point then do we have to address the whole? Sure, we can talk about it all day long, but the algorithm is not going to push us out to people. It's going to look for certain code words. So there's Joe and Lee again talking about how the government's controlling everything. They're going to get suppressed. We're not going to go out to a large audience with it, and they can't prove it. It'll all be shadow banned and algorithm behind it. Hey, sorry, man, the algorithm's just doing its thing. And then they got control. And that happens if, and I would say it already happened, if your government owns the companies who run social media. So if the US government owns social media and they're going to influence the algorithm, then it's still going to be controlled.
Yeah, and then look at what happened during COVID with the agencies having backdoor access to the social media companies. The Twitter files exposed that. Mark Zuckerberg came out and when it got exposed, and he talked about it and did his mea culpa.
Yep.
But
Yep.
during the recently, I don't know, several months back when Grok AI on X went off the rails and was just telling truth and dropping bombs, I asked it some things about what kind of content gets de-amplified, and it pretty much said, and I even said, look at my pinned post on my profile, and Grok responded that while your ideals are noble, the algorithm is not gonna push dialogue that unites people. It's going to amplify that which is divisive. Basically, in so many words, it said that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, There you go.
Yeah, and again, that's probably a subject for another day, because that whole, I mean, that we could go on a long time for that. Again, let's see if we can finish up and get to a conclusion for today. Free press, states, governments will always try to shape public opinion. That's just a fact. Media needs to be independent and transparent. That's my opinion. We should be, the message behind this is like, I would want us to push for a more free and transparent press and get that separation between the two. I don't think it can happen. I think, to be fair, what we're doing right now is as close as we're going to get right now in today's world. And again, that's going to be suppressed by algorithms, to getting a free press that we can ask questions that the mainstream media just is going to stop asking. And today our media is far more independent and transparent, or that's the way it should be. YouTube and independent journalists are gaining trust through transparency. Mainstream media is actually losing trust. And so there's that shift. But again, I would caveat it. If you control the company, you control their algorithm. So can we truly have truth and transparency if you also now own the social media that is competing with your paid for narratives on mainstream media?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see how the mainstream media recovers, to be honest. Um, and now I believe that's why they are pushing a lot of the people towards podcasts like Tucker Carlson, for example, and Megyn Kelly and other larger um, news personalities have been moving towards social media, because I think they know that the mainstream media has lost trust. I would argue that the percentage of people that trust the media is lower.
Yeah.
I think that's a euphemized version of the percentages, because based on all the things that I see, yes, there's always going to be people that adhere to the mainstream narratives, and that's what they want, and that's good enough. But I believe a lot more people have woken up, and I think a lot more people are getting away from that, and they know that, and that is why they're moving their people over.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much time we have left, but did you want me to foray into the modern media and people that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm thinking we've got about 15 more minutes left to play with, trying to keep it at a
Okay.
reasonable hour and a half.
I'm going to leave it to you guys to trust that I did look into this stuff, and you should go look into it. That way you can confirm it for yourself. There were rumors for years before I really knew much about it that Anderson Cooper had worked for the CIA. And he's actually a Vanderbilt. Gloria Vanderbilt was his mother, right? So an elite family. And it turns out, yes, he did. He interned, quote unquote, interned for the CIA. Now, if you knew nothing about Operation Mockingbird or any of these types of things, I would think most people would go, that's kind of weird. This big media news guy, why would he work for the CIA? I don't see the relationship between, this and that. Well, look at history. We're going to get into the secret societies and stuff at some point, but
Yeah.
the CIA has always had connections with elite families, right? And elite institutions. So it makes perfect sense that someone from an elite family might intern for the CIA and then become one of the biggest, online news personalities in the world. Okay. Further, I would highly recommend you look into the beef that happened in the last month or so between Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, who's like a real kind of extreme dude. They had a back and forth. Well, they're calling each other feds, that whole thing. Well, the gist of it was Tucker Carlson had said his father died not too long ago, right? His father was Dick Carlson, who was Voice of America. He was, he worked for the CIA. It came out. He worked for the CIA in the media arm of the CIA. Tucker denied knowing that his father worked for the CIA and said he only found out after his father died. And then Nick Fuentes threw up a clip of Tucker before his father passed on Sean Ryan's podcast, saying that his father worked, essentially in so many words, worked for the CIA, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, if you bring this up to people, they'll say, no, Tucker, man, he's calling out the foreign wars and all these things. What it doesn't that's sometimes is damage control, right?
Yeah.
Someone's cover gets blown. So what do? They got to make it look good. They got to get enough people on their side to say, no, Tucker, man, he's a stand up guy. He's a straight shooter. He's not CIA. It doesn't mean that that individual is a nefarious person, right? It's just like somebody who wants to succeed in their field and intelligence. He has family connections to it. That's a way to succeed in a given field, right? If you have the backing of the government, right? So again, allegedly, this is alleged. This is based on things that I've seen that everybody else can look at. So those
Yeah.
are just two examples. There are other people that I'm very suspicious of, but I'd highly recommend people looking into that stuff for themselves.
And look, I mean, it's not a stretch to realize we're all humans, right? And so when we meet certain people, we're like, man, I trust that person. This is why some news anchors got huge, right? Is because people trusted dialing into Walter Cronkite or whatever. I'm going back in the well on that one. But the point being is that when you see your favorite anchor, you've built a trust. America's built a trust with that person. They're like, I want to listen to that person. I trust them. The problem becomes is when the CIA is embedded with those individuals or even trained that individual because they know that individual is charismatic and they know that individual will gain trust with America. They know how to connect with people. Then they say, hey, look, you've got a fantastic thing. People look at you and they're like, I trust that guy or that girl. Then they're like, how about we train you and you share the message we want? It's not a big stretch that they would use people that can connect with people and that people trust to shape narratives. But
yeah, look, maybe if
that's
I was a huge content creator or media personality, I'd sell all you fucks out in a second. But
I
I've
would
never
hope.
been in that position. I don't think I would, but who knows? Maybe I would.
Yeah. I mean, let's hope. I mean, it's horrible because I think that it's horrible because again, I don't even want to name names, but you think of some people who started out telling very, very straightforward, truthful things, and then you get huge. And people always say you became a sellout. Why did you become a sellout? Because again, I would argue, just thinking through it, when you get big enough and you're resonating with the people, they're like, hey, we should pay that MFer. He's got a huge audience and everybody's listening to him. So is it a stretch that when you become a big YouTuber, if you get enough influence, that somebody will come along in the government and say, holy shit, people are listening to this guy. How about we see if we can pay him? Hey, Joe, I got a deal for you. How would you like to change your life forever? A few $1,000,000 that you didn't have before. All you have to do is just not mention this and maybe mention this a bit. So I bet you people make those deals when they get big enough and get recognized and they realize you're an influencer. And so how do you combat people staying true to themselves and not eventually succumbing to a little nibble here and there of money for content?
Right. And another thing you see a lot of the bigger podcasts that people might already be familiar with, as soon as they reached a certain level of exposure, they started having quote unquote former CIA guys on their podcast. It's a very common thing. It's
Right.
numerous podcasts. They
Yeah.
get to a certain level, past a certain level, and then all of a sudden they start having on former CIA. And that's what people would say is a handler. Someone who
Yeah.
kind of goes in and they kind of try to steer conversations towards certain things and other things or muddy the water on certain topics. That's
And
what
it's
I would argue.
it's real subtle too. Like, I mean, again, this is just think tanking. I'm not bringing receipts to this, but I think of an example in the Snowden case. Uh, they will have somebody who's trained in the CIA to that it's charismatic. So let's say you're a media influencer. Somebody in the CIA will become your friend. They'll you meet someone at a diner, Joe. You meet someone at a
Yeah.
giant diner, Joe, and they resonate with you, and you're like, I like this dude, and they become friends with you, and they start talking, and then and now we've got a friendship, and then that person starts slowly, hey, we should probably not talk about this. You don't even know if you're being embedded with people. I'm watching you, Joe. I'm watching you. That diner thing was awfully suspicious. You know a lot of shit. I'm gonna keep my shit on you. I'm gonna watch you.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's information control, and if you have
Yeah,
people that
right.
get a high level of status and exposure, then it would behoove them to get people close to them, even if not offering them money, because some of
Right.
these
It
content
just yeah.
creators are
Yeah.
huge. Like they don't need money. right?
Right.
And they have a massive reach, right? So you don't want to
Right.
go too far, because the last thing you want is a massive podcaster or a content creator shooting you down and then telling people that they were offered money.
Right.
So
In fact, you would probably not want to go to money first. You'd want to go to a relationship. Can you build a relationship with somebody and influence them on a friend level rather than having to pay money? Why would you want to pay them money as the first step?
yeah,
And we're
again,
going off.
this,
We're going off the rails on
yeah,
that,
yeah,
but
yeah. We went off the rails for a minute there.
So let's just summarize. Well, I think the key points is we're wrapping up. We've got about 6 minutes, 5 minutes left for this. Joe, I think first of all, I thought this was a great discussion. I hope that everybody out there listening thought this was a great discussion. The key takeaway is this: whether you believe in the receipts or not, or the people who say you're overstating the Project Mockingbird, it has been investigated by Congress. Journalists broke the story that the CIA was embedded with student associations in America. They had journalists that they were on the payroll. This was broken and researched by our Congress. And if you think that that all ended when Congress looked into it and, oh, that, hey, our bad, you caught us, and that ended, I think you're being a little naive. So if you, again, at the end of the day, I think you just want to big picture thinking here. If it's happened back then, it's probably still happening today. And I would argue that it's very much happening today.
Agreed.
So do you have any closing thoughts for us, before we close out tonight? I mean, do you have any takeaways you want people to have? By the way, before he answers that question, make sure you check out JJ State of the Deep. It's State of the Deep at substack.com. He's got written articles there, of course. So make sure you check him out. And of course, on my channel on YouTube here. But yeah, any closing thoughts you have for everybody?
Yeah, I'm gonna have a lot more content. I had to get a new computer because I had an old computer and it just was not working good with some of the platforms. So I have some stuff that I've been working on. It's kind of big picture stuff that's gonna be coming out, and then I'm gonna do like some shorter podcast type things where I rant about something that's current. I'm gonna start putting some of that stuff out. It's not gonna be probably super in-depth stuff, but well, I'll just kind of rant about certain things. Yeah, also I just wanted to add, you know, do your research on your own and look up books that you think might be interesting about these types of things. There's tons of them. And
Yeah.
see the connections, like the way things go down, and the way things, especially with what's happening now in the world. It's so important that people wake up to some of the things that are happening and realize the importance of awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a little plug for myself as well. I don't have as much time to read books as I used to, but I do like to read books that inform the stories that we're covering. I've got a book review series. I've done several books, one on the Luigi Mangione story, one on the Idaho 4 story. And now I'm reading a book that you recommended, Joe, to me, which was A One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb. And I've been doing chapter by chapter review, and I found that a lot of people are getting a lot out of that. There's the people who take the time. It's not one of my big, huge things. Like, for those of you who think I'm a sellout and I do everything for clickbait, those videos don't do well, right? But the people who do watch them love them. So check it out if you're thinking that you want a little deeper dive as we go through that book. There's a lot of stuff in that, I think, that's informing, in my opinion. And I'm not going to call them, but I conflate names sometimes. The Kirk situation, the Charlie Kirk situation. I think there's a lot of stuff that informs that, the Jeffrey Epstein files and stuff like that, that really the foundational stuff on that, and including the government's ties to organized crime and stuff like that, really well documented so far. I'm only a few chapters in. Thank you, by the way, for the recommendation on that book. It's been phenomenal. And I think that everybody would get a lot out of it if they would read books like that, or at least listen to me rant about it.
Right on. And I want to offer a correction. In our first video, I stated that BlackRock owned Vanguard. I got it kind of reversed because they all own each other. It's actually Vanguard is the #1 shareholder in BlackRock now. So
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, and I think that's the problem too. Is like when you talk about these deep subjects, we're going to make mistakes from time to time. We're going to say things backwards. We're going to say things a little wrong, which is why, like Joe said, do your own research. It's great to listen to a couple of guys talk about it if you don't have time to go pick up a book and read, or you don't care enough. So that's fine. But keep in mind that we make mistakes. We might remember a detail wrong here and there. as I always say, big picture thinking. Just think of the big picture. If you can understand the concept, the details aren't as important as understanding, oh, I bet you I understand how that works now. In theory, the government probably is influencing media. If that's all you take away from tonight, maybe the government is influencing media and is telling us how to think about things. I never really thought about it that way. If that's all you take away, we won tonight, in my opinion.
Here, here.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching us. It was great talking to you, Joe. I love the collaboration we got going on. I think you and I are going to do big things in the future. We got so many huge topics coming in, and there's probably going to be more that we're going to do in the future. I hope you guys appreciate JJ. Again, he writes under JJ at State of the Deep. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with them. Fantastic. I think, without plugging myself, two good minds side by side. Thanks a lot for coming to the show tonight.
Yeah. Thanks, DA. Keep after it, man. You've been going hard.
I'm hitting it hard. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye, everybody.